warm welcome. You're joining us at Hydepark on AdaDerana 24 with a new German act in force, the Supply Chain Due Diligence Act. Many Sri Lankan exporters are said to be affected, requiring to comply with certain new legislation. And to discuss all this and much more in terms of attracting German investments, trade, and how Sri Lanka should comply with these new legislations going forward, I've invited to our studios the Chief Delegate of the Delegation of German Industry and Commerce in Sri Lanka, Antonia Von Schonburg. A warm welcome. I hope I pronounced your name right.
You pronounce it perfectly. Thank you so much for the invitation. Glad to be here.
Good to have you. So, as I said, a new German act. This is what we've been talking about, and that it is going to affect our exporters. When Sri Lanka is reeling from an economic crisis, with exports the way forward, Sri Lanka trying to improve on export revenue. Will this new legislation really affect our inflows of funds?
Well, it might in fact affect some of the companies. If you allow me, I'd like to give an overview of where the Act comes from and what it actually means, because then it will be easier to understand where Sri Lankan companies will actually be affected. So it started out in 2016 with a National Action Plan for Business and Human Rights, with the idea to improve the human rights situation worldwide and to make sure that globalization gets a more of a social dimension as well. So then after introducing that, more of a guideline, it wasn't law, more of a guideline, in 2020 they did a survey on companies with more than 500 people, employees working, to see how many of those companies were actually complying with the due diligence obligations, and they found that less than 20% were doing that. So they took matters into hand and introduced the Supply Chain Due Diligence Act that will come into force on the 1st of January. The Due Diligence Act wants companies to exercise a due diligence, a due regard to human rights and environment related due diligence in their supply chains. That will affect not only their own business area, but will also affect their contractual partners, i.e. their direct suppliers, and to a certain extent also the actions of indirect suppliers. They have to do that in an appropriate manner, an appropriate fashion according to the law, and the appropriate fashion to do that will be to first establish a risk management system in the company to make sure that they assess the risks, the human rights violation risks within the supply chain, create preventive measures.
So this is how they are supposed to comply.
Exactly.
Before going there, Marie, if you could explain to us what the Supply Chain and Due Diligence Act is. I know that the Joint Apparel Association recently too raised concern on how SMEs would be affected and certain requirements. So don't Sri Lankan companies already comply, or what's missing there? What is this? Is it targeting child labor, human rights altogether? What does this mean?
So as I was saying, the Supply Chain Due Diligence Act asks companies to handle their obligations in respect to their own business area, but also when it comes to their direct suppliers, and to a certain extent to their indirect suppliers. Excuse me. So where are Sri Lankan exporters or Sri Lankan companies generally affected by the new law? If they are direct suppliers to German companies who have a headcount of over 3,000 employees worldwide, they will be part of that direct supply chain that has to comply with the Due Diligence Act. If they are SMEs that are indirect suppliers to German companies, as long as there is no suspicion or no obvious incompliance of human rights in those indirect suppliers, there will not be a need to do a risk assessment for them. Right? So generally you could say that those supplying directly to German companies, even if it's the branches in their branches in Sri Lanka, not only to Germany, they are part of that direct supply chain. Hence, they do have to comply with all the human rights due diligence obligations that the German companies have to comply with. But that doesn't mean that SMEs who aren't direct suppliers are off the hook. They're not. Because as I said, that in case a company, a German company, has to have a suspicion that human rights due diligence obligations aren't met in those indirect suppliers, they actually have to look into it, right? And if they see that those obligations aren't met, they will also have to act on it. There is a certain, I'd say, a gray zone, because the Act also says the German companies have to act in an appropriate fashion, which means there is a certain appropriateness to what they have to do. And if the extent to which they would have to go through to make sure that there are absolutely no human rights violation in indirect suppliers, then they're not, they won't have to face fines if there are actually human rights violations. They just have to do everything they can that's in their hands. If they did that and there are still violations they cannot control, then the German companies will not have to face legal repercussion. Again, that doesn't mean that SMEs are off the hook. And I'm going to tell you why. Because German companies, even though they're not in a legal prickle, to say it, if there were actually a human rights violation, just for their own sake, for their own security, for their own good night's sleep, they might actually force their direct suppliers to only work with suppliers that do meet the human rights standards, i.e. do have a certain certification they can show to say, we are complying with everything you ask from me when it comes to human rights due diligence obligations.
So what should these companies do in order to comply? I think you were talking about a few areas, but if you can elaborate on how these SMEs and even large companies that do not comply with regulation and human rights requirements in Germany, what do they need to do now?
Okay, so let me go back to what German companies are obliged to do. What are the appropriate measures the German government asked from those companies? It means they have to do a risk assessment. It means they have to incorporate preventive measures, remedy any violations, introduce a person in the company who is a contact person for human rights issues, a human rights officer, a due diligence officer, and they have to constantly measure that these risks are being taken care of, that measurements are being taken, and also have to publish an annual report on their due diligence activities. Plus, what they also have to do is establish a complaints process which is accessible to everyone, so that anyone who sees a human rights violation can actually go and say, look, you're doing this wrong. So this whole process that German companies right now are obliged to do any SME can already start doing without the obligation. Start looking at your processes. Start doing a risk assessment. And the risk assessment has to be done regarding the supply chain specific risks that are prohibition of child labor, including prohibition of child labor, freedom from discrimination, occupational health and safety measures, adequate living wage, and not causing any harmful soil change or water pollution. So you can already start looking into, am I complying or am I not complying with this? Before anyone even obliges you to do that, because you're only an indirect supplier. You can already start with this and look for certifications that will also show your clients that you are complying with this. Because that's the other reason why I want to say that companies are not off the hook, even if they're not directly affected by the law starting on the 1st of January. For two reasons. Because there is a European Due Diligence Act in the making, which will probably come into force in 2024. And that Due Diligence Act, unlike the German one, does not only look at the core business area and direct suppliers, it includes the complete supply chain until the very last link. So any SMEs, everyone will be included in that law.
So does that mean even if you do not comply in 2023 across, I mean, if you're exporting to Europe, then you will have to, whether you like it or not, by 2024. So you might as well start the process
Very good point.
for
Exactly.
January.
Exactly. If your clients, obviously, if your clients in Germany are companies with less than 3,000 employees worldwide, you don't have to fear anything.
Right.
It's not yet, you're not yet part of that supply chain.
Less than how many employees again?
3,000
Okay.
worldwide. The act, starting from the 1st of January, will only apply to companies who have more than 3,000 employees worldwide and their branches in the whole world.
And the supply chain.
And their direct suppliers.
Okay.
Right? Starting the 1st of January 24, companies with more than 1,000 employees worldwide will fall under that act.
Right.
Then, as I said, probably in 24, the European Supply Chain Act will come into force. And again, they're not only looking at the companies and their direct suppliers, they're looking at the complete supply chain. And also it will affect companies with less than 500 employees worldwide. If it is a very resource intensive product or service, it will actually go down to 250 employees worldwide. So it's going to be very hard to get around that law from 24.
But there will be time to prepare yourselves, and these companies
Exactly.
will have time to comply and maybe up your game
Exactly.
as you move forward.
Absolutely. As we were saying, there are already so many Sri Lankan exporters, big companies, especially in the apparel industry, that are already perfectly prepared. But SMEs, yes, they do have time now to really start, but they need to start now. Complacency is not an option. It really isn't. And even so, and that is the second reason I wanted to mention, even if you're exporting to countries where there isn't a supply chain act, due diligence act, as it might be in Germany now the case, or in the European Union very soon, other countries already do have guidelines or even law-binding acts. UK, Australia, Canada, the US, Norway is preparing an act. France, Netherlands, Japan does have, even though it's non-legally binding, they do have guidelines already, and more more countries will join. It is a worldwide trend because consumers are pushing for it. Consumers want products that have been sustainably produced or services that have been sustainably produced. And when I say sustainability, sustainably, I mean in the broadest sense possible. It means obviously environmental issues being respected, but also human rights being respected. So there's going to be more and more a push for products and services that comply with due diligence, be there an act or not.
Responsible products that comply with human rights and due diligence. I was going to ask you what advantages for exporters, but I think it's clear if you want to retain your market share, if you want to move forward and bring the much needed foreign exchange to the economy, that's where the world is headed, and I suppose Europe, a big share of Sri Lankan apparel and exports. 6% of Sri Lankan products are exported to Germany. Of that, I think we saw a 32% increase in export earnings between 2012 and 2021. So how do you forecast this shift going forward for Sri Lanka as we are looking at new ways to approach exports, value addition, to looking at improving market share? How do you think Sri Lankan exporters, earlier when we spoke, we understood that agriculture and apparel, these are Sri Lanka's main exports to Germany.
Yeah.
How do we improve?
Well, going for sustainable products is definitely a good solution. And Sri Lanka is already really strong in ecological production and exports to Germany. And the advantage and the possibilities for Sri Lankan exporters is in that, as I was saying, there is a worldwide trend for people asking for real products. And they are willing to pay a premium price for that. I always like to think of the example of Wi-Fi in hotels, for example. 20 years ago, Wi-Fi in hotels wasn't like your standard. People were willing to pay an extra $10 or $15 or $20 per night so that you would give them Wi-Fi. Nowadays, if a hotel doesn't have Wi-Fi, people just don't go there directly. It's a standard. And the same goes for sustainable products. It is still a prime product. It still is a smaller part of the consumers who are pushing for those products, be it sustainably manufactured apparel or sustainably manufactured agricultural products. They want that as a standard in the future, and hence I'm saying, hence also a lot of countries are pushing for due diligence acts to really reinforce that. So where will that go? Well, as I said, make sure that you start doing the due processes to go through the certification to really prove to your client and or the end consumer that you are part of that sustainable production, of that sustainable supply chain, and use those months that are coming now in the upcoming months to really get prepared. And yes, you were saying that Germany is actually the fourth largest market for Sri Lankan exports, and so I think what the exporters should do, or Sri Lanka as a country should do, is really market that they are already into organic production in the agriculture, that there already are. Some are worldwide leaders in the apparel industry, really working for brands, American or German top brands that everybody knows on football players or cricketers' shirts. So they really are already some companies who are playing in the top notch. And I think that SMEs can really learn from that and can go the same way that those big companies went, through doing the right processes, through the certification to make sure that the clients know that you are complying with whatever they need to be, well, to sleep well at night buying your products.
Mm-hmm. So Sri Lanka's the crisis, partly in terms of food and security, we've been talking about a shift from chemical fertilizer to biofertilizer, and going organic. 100% organic policy was implemented, and a lot of criticism due to the reduced yield production and the current crisis in terms of securing food. So how do we link this with the requirement for organic food there in Germany and possibly in Europe by 2024, especially with agricultural products being one of our biggest exports to Germany behind apparel?
Correctly. You know what, I think the end goal or the idea of going organic was the correct choice. Again, for everything I said, consumers are pushing for it, clients are asking for it. I think the way it was done was probably not the correct, the best option. When it comes to introducing new ways of farming, ecological farming, you need a certain time to adapt. You need to educate farmers on how to do it, and you need to make sure that there's a period of adaptation where you slowly go down on the fertilizer, on the chemical fertilizers, and then build in biodegradable or ecologically responsible fertilizers, and also change your way of farming. And I think that wasn't done. It was more of a from one day to another introducing while we're going ecological farming, and that's it. So I think the Sri Lankan agricultural sector should really keep that goal of ecological farming in mind, and once they are back to the yields they need to obviously sustain their livelihoods, then start slowly introducing ecological ways of farming, because as I said, you will give yourself a chance of actually asking a premium price for it, because those who want the products that are sustainable and ecological are willing to pay a bit extra to really have that premium product. The same goes for services, by the way. We were talking about the hotel industry. So tomorrow we're going to give out awards, sustainability awards, together with the Friedrich Naumann Foundation for Freedom. And there are going to be 4 categories for apparel and agriculture, and 2 for the hotels. And one of the tour operators who applied for the award actually struck me, or their application struck me, because they are demanding from the hotels they stay at that they give their drivers a decent accommodation. Don't let them sleep in some corner with the mosquitoes and the heat, but give them really a dignified accommodation to make sure that those drivers get a good night's rests, and rest assured, pun intended, that guests will be willing to pay a premium price, knowing that their driver, who, by the way, is literally in charge of their lives on the road, had a good night's sleep, and they will feel good about it, and they will be happy to pay a bit more for their vacation, knowing that everyone in the supply chain for their services is treated fairly. So it really gives you a chance to uplift a whole sector, to uplift the quality of your services. And that goes, again, it goes for agricultural products, it goes for apparel, it goes for any kind of service. If you really start looking into who are the people at stake, and what can you do for them to really make sure that everyone in the supply chain is uplifted, then you will have a better product, a better service, and you will be able to market it at a higher price. But then again, you also have to market it. And that is where I think Sri Lanka has probably also been lacking so far in really marketing, especially their tourism, to customers, and saying like, we're willing to go the extra mile for you. We're willing to comply with the human rights and environmental due diligence obligations to make sure that you're feeling comfortable when you come to Sri Lanka. So I find that is a good opportunity.
That's interesting, and definitely an opportunity for Sri Lanka as we look forward to attracting high-end tourists to the country, value and establishing that as a tourism market. How can the German Chamber really support here in terms of whether it's the transition to organic or uplifting the tourism industry in terms of know-how, technology, or even the kind of support that a diplomatic or country-to-country relations could fulfill?
So what we do at the Delegation of German Industry and Commerce is we have established sector committees. One of them being logistics, construction, investors generally, and one of them, I can't remember the others, but one of them is also tourism. So what we do is the German companies or Sri Lankan companies working with German clients and or suppliers get together 3 or 4 times a year and really just bring forward their issues and try to find solutions to their struggles that they have. And at the end of the day, we take these requests from those companies and hand them over to the authorities to make sure that they understand that at least the companies we're in contact with are struggling with issue A, B, C, and how we feel or how they feel as a committee. Sri Lanka could do better to be more business friendly, to be more investor friendly.
Well, I think it's time we take a short break here at Hydepark. To stay with us, we're in conversation with the Chief Delegate of the German Chamber of Commerce in Sri Lanka. Welcome back. We're in conversation with the Chief Delegate of the Delegation of German Industry and Commerce, Marie Antonia von Schonburg. Did I do that right again?
Perfect.
Okay, so we were talking about tourism here just before we went in for a break. We're aware that German tourists look for spiritual well-being. That's the kind of tourism that Sri Lankans mostly market there in Germany. How's that doing?
You should ask the tourist sector how that's going. What I do want to say though is I think that marketing, obviously the spiritual well-being, Ayurveda as one of the biggest attractions in Sri Lanka is obviously a good idea. But I feel you could do so much more by really tapping into other sectors as well. I mean, there's so many people out there that absolutely love surfing. And one of my friends, when I told him I was going to Sri Lanka, the first thing he said, like, oh my God, the best kite surfing in the world. And I had never heard of Sri Lanka for kite surfing before. So I think there's so many more things that Sri Lanka could use to market to the tourists in Germany, in Europe, and all around the world. But it is good to really tap into the strong features of Ayurveda, for example.
The Doing Business Index we've been talking about for a long time, but as the German Chamber of Commerce, how do you assess the doing business environment in Sri Lanka for investments from your country?
So I don't know if I'm a big friend of those indexes. Obviously you need them, but I think what we are looking at, especially when we talk to authorities, is really transparency and consistency and efficiency of the processes. And where Sri Lanka has been lacking over the last years definitely has been consistency. We have seen so many changes, some of them overnight, and it's really hard for investors to reassess because especially German investors, and I think so many other investors as well from other countries, when German investors go to a country, it's not to just go in there, take the best they can and then run. German investors go in there basically for life. They want to stay there forever and they want to be part of the community of the country they're investing in. And then when you decide on an investment, having in mind a certain framework for that investment, it's important to keep up that framework, because if you change it every once in a while, and every once in a while is maybe okay, but not constantly, and changes here and there, then the investment will get very nervous. And while the German investment that has been here, our feedback is that they're really happy. They have absolutely no intention of leaving the country, but some of them are really struggling because the whole framework's changed so much. For example, obviously power cuts. The energy prices obviously is a worldwide issue, but especially here in Sri Lanka with electricity prices rising so much. So they constantly have to reassess and make sure that their investment is still feasible in the country. As I said, as far as I know, none of the investment has any wish to leave the country, and they're really happy also because there's really good talent in the country as of today, because we're starting to see that there is a real brain drain happening in Sri Lanka. More and more companies are struggling to really find the talent they need. Again, it is a worldwide kind of tendency, but has been very apparent over the last couple of months here in Sri Lanka. So basically, as I said, transparency, efficiency, and stability is what German investors and any other investment really needs. And I was telling you, I think right now, if you ask German investors, they'd probably be a bit weary of what's going on, and would probably just sit back for a moment or a couple of months, maybe years, to see how Sri Lanka is evolving now after the whole turmoil of a new government and all the other changes I've been mentioning.
Have you had a chance to say this to any of our authorities?
Oh yes, we are. I have to say that the authorities here really are amazing when it comes to opening their doors to us. Whatever issues we're bringing forward, we're in constant communication with BOIs and other line ministry to really just tell them honestly and openly what the issues are of that investment.
When you say consistency in terms of the framework, the investment framework, what does it really mean? We're talking about a crisis period also. That has affected overall businesses, whether it's German or any other country or local businesses across the board. Or are we talking about policies that have been continuing, which continue to change with government change? How would you look at these, and what areas do you think your country's investments and businessmen would want changed?
So it is, when it comes to policies, obviously now the tax hike of 100% is not really helpful. But it also, we find that there is a lack of consistency when it comes to contacts within the ministries and the authorities. There is a tendency to a lot of changes, and hence business relationships have to be created newly again. And then every time there is somebody new in a ministry or an authority, then we find that just the little details change and just create unnecessary worries or irritation in the companies.
So in terms of the legal framework, how would you assess Sri Lanka's continuity in terms of allowing a feasible environment for trade and investment?
The legal framework, that's a good question. I'm not in a position to assess every part of the legal framework, to be honest. I would like to give a more general answer, and again, it means whatever the legal framework is, make sure it stays the same, because when an investment, when a company decides to do an investment, they do know what the legal framework is, and they can handle whatever obstacle there is. But if it changes, then that means they have to constantly give a feedback to the mother company. Well, this is happening, that's happening, how does that affect us, and is the investment still feasible in the country? Generally, what I would say is make it easy for investment to come. Obviously, tax regulations, make sure they have tax advantages, make sure they find the premises easy and fast and at a good price. Make sure that all the authorities are working together and you don't send people from one ministry to the other and just, well, that's not me, go and speak to somebody else. And then a process like that can take months or even years, and you're really losing out on investment. And I think that especially right now, with everything we've seen in China, and a big upset in the supply chains because of the lockdowns in China, a lot of German companies, and again, not only German companies, are looking to diversify their supply chains, and they're happy to do that in the Asia-Pacific region from China, not necessarily disinvestment. They're not leaving China, but they're looking to really strengthen their supply chains in other countries, or to start going into new countries. And we've seen that Vietnam right now, there's a run of German companies to go to Vietnam. Obviously, it's close proximity to China, but they have the framework. Everything is easy. You just go there, and it's just within weeks, you have all your legal things sorted out, and you can start producing and manufacturing. And I feel like Sri Lanka, because there is so much going on, and again, not everything is Sri Lanka's fault, obviously. With so much going on, it's just Sri Lanka is not a good alternative to other countries like Vietnam, Thailand, Malaysia, Bangladesh, even Pakistan right now is one of the top alternatives, and we're losing out because there has not been a big marketing for Sri Lanka as a production hub, and also because of everything we've mentioned already, kind of an instability, and that's just what investment doesn't like.
Does this sum up to say that the doing business environment is not so friendly in Sri Lanka compared to all these other countries in the region that you've been talking about?
It's, again, it's less transparent, it's less efficient, and hence it is slower. If a company right now is looking into diversifying their supply chains because they have to balance their investment in China. Right now, there are other countries that do offer transparency, flexibility, and effectiveness for that investment. Something that Sri Lanka definitely has to work on, but I know it can get there.
With prolonged lockdowns in China, supply chain impact due to the Ukraine-Russia war, the energy crisis that Germany is facing as well during the upcoming season, what products and areas do you think Sri Lanka could collaborate with Germany to expand the base of products that are exported to Germany? And also we're talking about renewable energy here in Sri Lanka. Yes, we are in a crisis in terms of managing energy, fuel, but we're also talking about looking at ways to export renewable energy or other related products. So how do you think the German chamber could be the facilitator here to expand trade relations?
So I think, first of all, you're totally right. Everything that's renewable energies is a good idea to invest in right now, simply to be less reliant on fossil fuels and on fuel imports. And I mean, we do have a lot of sun here. We already do have hydropower. We could, or Sri Lanka could, expand their wind power. And other areas I would look into is also trying to create negative CO2 credit with such a lush vegetation, and making sure that there are areas where vegetation is being produced to really offset CO2 footprints of other countries. It could sell those credits and really make a business out of it. And the other sector I think is still completely undervalued is the IT sector, services, because it also would mean that, I was mentioning the brain drain earlier, it would mean that people could stay here and offer services worldwide from here without having to leave the country. The talent would be able to stay in the country, and you would be able to export services again at a premium price. When it comes to IT services, the first thing I thought of always was India, and then I came here, and then I'm like, why is nobody talking about Sri Lanka? Again, so much talent here in Sri Lanka, and we could definitely be an alternative to countries like India when it comes to exporting those services. So those would be a couple of ideas, and obviously keep working on the agricultural products, because we love produced fruits from Sri Lanka in Germany, and the apparel sector, as I was saying, the quality of the apparel sector is just amazing. And also what I wanted to say is actually add, basically I'd say you could produce any product you want in Sri Lanka that is not heavily relying on energy. So don't even think about the steel industry, but any niche parts and products in the supply chain you could easily produce here. I was mentioning a German company in the automobile sector producing here in Sri Lanka state-of-the-art components for international customers, and they have nothing to shy away from when it comes to the quality compared to what you can produce in Germany. It's exactly the same standard, again, because of high quality labor force, and you don't need big manufacturing sites to actually do niche products and components that you could produce from here. And again, logistics is such a key advantage of Sri Lanka, being based where it is in the middle of all those shipping lines between continents, and it could easily bring in the provisions and the products, produce here, do value addition, as you were mentioning earlier. Do the value addition here and then export really high-end, high-value products to the world from here. It can be easily done, but then again, you need consistent framework, efficient processes, and just consistency, basically.
So
we're going back in circles.
So that's all the time we have, but I think I can take a minute to ask you. 6 months you've been here.
Exactly today, yes.
Have you had a chance today, 6 months today?
Yes.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
So thank you. It's nice to have you at Hydepark, but have you had a chance to visit around Sri Lanka and see the country for yourself?
Not much yet. I've been to Kandy at the Perahera in August.
Yeah.
And
that's
I went.
A spectacle.
It was a spectacle. It was beautiful. And then I went to Matarang and Gaul a couple of weeks ago with a friend of mine. But I'm looking forward to my Christmas vacation, and I'll really get a chance to travel around the country and get to know it.
Yeah, and maybe you can tell us how to market the country, as you say.
I'll definitely.
That's where we lag.
I'll definitely make some notes and pass them on to you.
So thank you very much, Marie, for your time here at Hydepark.
Thank you so much.
Ayubowan. We had with us Maria Antonia Von Schonburg, the Chief Delegate of the Delegation of German Industry and Commerce in Sri Lanka, talking to us about a new German law, supply and due diligence law, how it will affect Sri Lanka, Sri Lankan exporters, the SME sector, as well as how we can improve our trade and investment framework in order to attract more investments and expand trade relations with countries such as Germany. We'll see you again next week at the same time with yet another discussion. Good night.